listening to The Doctor's Corner with Dr. Kline and Janelle Elgaway.
Good evening and welcome to the Doctor's Corner with Dr. Kline and myself, Janelle Elgaway. Have you ever been afraid or too uncomfortable to ask your doctor certain questions? I know I have. Tonight, Dr. Kline is happy to answer any health-related questions if you call in at 415-915-2291. Don't forget, you can live chat with myself and everyone tuning in on KA's YouTube channel, Conspiracies Against Wellness Livestream. Also, you don't want to miss tonight's show on Call Nation with guest Dr. Terry Lewis at 8, 7 Central. She will discuss urinary drug analysis and toxicology reports. Well, hello there, Dr. Kline, and how are you this evening?
I couldn't be better, Janelle. Thank you for inviting me.
Happy to have you. While we wait for people to call in with questions, what have you been researching or working on lately?
I have two projects I'm interested in because my specialty is chronic diseases. One is diabetes, and the second is the treatment of pain. And I was just thinking, we call this pain management. It's interesting how people get their fingers in the medical pie. As doctors, we don't use the word management. That's a business word. We talk about pain treatment. Pain management sounds like something you would get on the third floor at Macy's, but this is something that happens in doctors' offices. It's pain treatment. And the other thing I'm interested in is diabetes, because I think we may have it wrong.
Okay.
So those are my two current topics of interest.
Sure. So how do we have diabetes wrong? Like, what does that mean? Well,
in researching the topic back to the turn of the century, we have basically been treating blood sugars in order to improve the disease. And the question arises whether blood sugars are really a symptom of the disease, or is the disease itself. For example, when you have the flu and have fever, that's a symptom of the disease. So you take aspirin to lower the fever. That's treating the symptom of the disease. You're not going to cure the virus or the bacteria that's causing the lung infection, but you feel better.
Right.
My current thinking is that's the same thing in diabetes.
Huh. How long have you been researching this, and what was your original thoughts on diabetes before you started looking into it more?
When I was a medical student, I was being taught how to give insulin. And they said, well, we'll just give this person 10 units of insulin because their blood sugar's high.
Right.
And I said, well, do you have like a little algorithm or something? Blood sugar of X, and then you give X. Well, no, we just kind of do it by experience. And I said, experience? You're giving insulin, this dangerous drug? Well, this is the way we've always done it. And so starting at that point in medical school, which was for me about 200 years ago, I began to become concerned about this. And in my practice, I adopted a much more conservative approach. Because I'm a chronic disease person, it sounds like diabetes would be chronic disease, but only those diabetics that had a lot of complications I saw in my practice. So I treated very conservatively with low doses, and they seemed to do all right. But that's kind of like in medical school. Well, that's doing all right. So I set upon a project to go on the internet, because it's so easy now. I used to have to get out of the library with this huge bag of dimes and get the journals out and make copies of them. It was awful. I remember driving to Portland, Oregon once from Eugene, a 2-hour drive, to sit there all day in the library copying articles. Now I go on the internet and I print them out. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I was able to print out 3,000 articles. Took me over a year.
Wow.
And I have them in 47 different folders. And I'm trying to take a scientific view and not be biased. And so there's lots and lots of evidence that we have it wrong, basically.
So
and
how do we have it wrong? What is wrong?
Well, the exact thing that's wrong, and this is promoted by the American Diabetes Association and people in Boston mainly, where I used to practice.
Mm-hmm.
If you keep the blood sugar controlled, see, they use the word control. If you keep the blood sugar controlled, you won't get all the complications of diabetes, blindness, renal failure, heart attacks, strokes, all those terrible things they tell you about on the website. And there's actually only one study out of over 100,000 studies on diabetes that actually came to that conclusion. And that particular study is called the DCCT. It was done by a physician at Boston, the head of the diabetes unit at the Massachusetts General Hospital, very, very prestigious. Mm-hmm. He actually said that he believed his study was the most important study done in the history of medicine. But when you look carefully at the study, there are some serious problems with it. But most importantly, in science and in medicine, when we are coming forth with, quote, discoveries, as this was, you have to do it again. You have to replicate it. Somebody else has to replicate it before it's given credence in the scientific community. That study was done in 1998, I believe, and it has not yet been replicated.
Wow.
So that study, technically, from a scientific viewpoint, remains on the shelf. It's interesting and blah, 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 but you don't change your practice until it's replicated.
Right. Dr. Kline, we have a call. Let me pull them in quickly. Brian, can you help me out with that? Oh, here. Hello, caller from area code 406. What's your name and where are you from?
My name's Lindsay Jellum, and I'm from Montana.
Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, Lindsay. Big sky country.
Hi, how are you guys? Yes, big sky country. Cold.
What's your question for this evening?
Yes, I was wondering. I'm still a chronic pain patient, but I'm no longer being treated, and I was wondering that after being having my pain, or excuse me, my medication stopped, and now that I'm after no longer having withdrawals, but now at the time I had no high blood pressure, and I had no high pulse issues at the time. I was wondering why, and if you can answer the question, at this time, why do you think that I have high blood pressure and also pulse and then also heart palpitation problems?
What is the underlying cause for your pain?
Well, I have some neck issues. I have a bulging disc in my neck, and then I also have chronic fatigue syndrome and also fibromyalgia, and then I also have a bulging disc in my back.
How much pain are you in now off your medicines?
Oh, I'd say on a scale of 1 to 10. On a good day, probably a 6, and then on a bad day, I'd say probably an 8 at least, or sometimes a 10 out of a 10. But I guess usually on a good day, between a 4 and a 6.
How were you before when you were on your pain medicine?
Oh, I'd say my quantity and quality of life was 100% better than what I am doing now. But it's manageable at the point.
Yeah, in other words, you're putting up with it.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
living.
that's what people in who lived in caves, 100,000 years ago did. They just put up with it.
Yeah.
So we're kind of back to caveman medicine. The reason your pulse and blood pressure are up is because you're in pain.
Okay.
That's the main cause. So that's interesting you should say that. So in this case, pain medicine, which would probably lower your blood pressure and pulse because you're not in pain, actually would become a treatment for your pulse irregularity and your high blood pressure.
Okay.
So you've not only been deprived of pain, but you've been put into a new medical problem. So if I were you, I would go online and look up the Montana Board of Medicine. Each state, it calls a little different. And you go online, and they have a little button you press for complaints. And I would file a complaint against the doctor who did that, and be always polite, just the facts, no emotional language. I was functioning like this on my pain medicine. It was taken off for no medical reason against my will, and now I'm functioning like this. And I now have a new problem from my pain. I have elevated blood pressure and pulse, which is common with untreated pain. Now, the Board of Registration may not get back to you, but they will always send a letter to the doctor. They are pretty much required to do that, which is common with untreated pain.
About that.
Okay.
Now, the Board of Registration.
Yep, I see. I absolutely see. I'm writing notes as we speak.
They will always. And, a lot of people are afraid to do that, afraid the doctor will retaliate. If the doctor retaliates, you send another complaint, because it is unprofessional to retaliate against the patient who is speaking up. You need to be treated with pain medicine. That's why God put the poppy plant on the planet. Pain medicine was first used in Mesopotamia, which is now modern-day Iraq, 3,500 years ago. 3,500 BC. That's 5,000 years ago. And it's been pretty much in use since then. And guess what? It's worked well. It's safe. And any physician who would taper you for no reason, or the CDC made them do it, or the devil made them do it, is unprofessional.
Oh, absolutely. I understand that. Well, I thank you for your time. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for calling in, Lindsay. Did you have any other questions at all?
Well, I guess one other question that I have is that, of course, is that, well, I guess I don't know how to word this, is that I guess probably they're all underlying symptoms from not having your pain being treated, is that kind of all comes with the territory, is that your nausea goes up, and then you end up having symptoms with your digestion and different things like that. Is that probably something that would where you have I guess untreated diarrhea and different things like that, things that weren't happening at the time that I probably was treated with my pain medication, that just kind of ended up coming back to where I ended up, now I have problems that I don't get away from the toilet very often.
When was your pain medicine stopped?
Last January.
Okay. No, that may be a different issue.
Okay.
Yeah. So in other words, you should have that evaluated separately, but you also mention in your history that you give the doctor, last January I did come off, was taken off forcibly off of my opiates. So, the doctor can then decide whether or not that's a factor or not. Diarrhea is related to opiates, but it seems kind of a long time.
Yeah.
Just as a guess.
Okay. All righty. All right. Well, that's all wonderful things to consider.
It was nice talking with you. Big sky country.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you, Lindsay,
well,
for
thank
calling.
you very much. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
appreciate
well, you
it.
take care of yourself, and hopefully happy spring.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
We have a question off of YouTube. Stacy Fields wants to know, do we really have any recourse at all when the primary symptoms not being tested or treated leads to other issues like this? I guess like the, having diarrhea.
Well, any time a doctor does something to you and it causes potential harm, then that's a case for malpractice investigation. And that's what the Board of Registration in Medicine does. The Board of Registration gives me a license to practice medicine, and if they think I've done something wrong, they take the license away, and I cannot practice medicine.
Right.
So there's rules about what the practice of medicine is, and states decide that within their boards of registration of medicine. Each state is a little different. So, I mean, that's the basis of any kind of negligence. If I do something to anyone that causes harm, I have ice on my in the driveway of my business and somebody slips, that's negligence. It's my job to get rid of the ice. So the same thing with doctors. If doctors do anything that causes harm, then it needs to go before the Board of Registration in Medicine for a question of whether or not this was malpractice or whether or not this was just malaccurrence, we call it. In other words, it was just going to happen anyway.
Right.
So, yes, you do have recourse.
We have another question from Juanita Jordan. Dr. Kline, do you have anything specific that you recommend for insomnia?
One of the things I recommend for insomnia, they told me in medical school, was you get out your anatomy book and you start reading it. And then pretty soon you doze off. There are, I like old radio shows from back in the 50s and 60s, and you can get them online, and they're fun to listen to. I used to listen to them as a kid. So I listen in the evening, and I get about halfway through, and I'm asleep. So I have to keep doing it over and over again because I don't know the ending. Reading books, medicines really do not work well for sleep. They deprive you of deep sleep, which is stage 4 sleep.
Right.
None of them preserve. Go ahead.
Like Ambien and stuff like that?
Yes, Ambien, benzodiazepines, even antihistamines. None of them really work. So if you can't sleep because you have pain, guess what? You treat the pain.
Right.
So you have to treat the underlying disorder. If you're running a high pulse all the time and you can't sleep because you're anxious, then you can have medicines for your anxiety or your pulse, either one. But actually taking a sleeping pill is the least effective way for more than a couple of days. Nothing wrong with using them for a couple of days. You just come back from a long flight, you can't sleep, you're all out of whack. 3 or 4 days is fine. Ambien has a particularly bad profile of causing all kinds of weird things to happen. I'm sure you read about them in the paper. It can cause a temporary psychosis, disorientation. The other thing is to look at the sleep carefully. Recently, I read a paper that interrupted sleep is normal. So this is a person who falls asleep at 10 o'clock, gets up at 2, watches television for 2 hours, and goes back to sleep. That's actually a normal sleep pattern. So first you have to be sure you're not getting sleep. And how do you know that? You know it the next day if you feel terrible. Right. When you don't get sleep, you feel terrible. If you're not feeling terrible the next day, whatever sleep you're getting may be enough. Eleanor Roosevelt only slept 4 hours a day. Some people can get away with a little bit, some people a lot. Other people who are real deep sleepers will actually fall asleep suddenly and go into that stage 4 sleep, which you don't need very much. And then they'll wake up and they'll think they haven't been asleep. So the key thing is how you feel the next day.
Okay. Somebody wanted to know, what about melatonin? What do you think about that? Does that work?
I don't really have a lot of information on melatonin. It's pretty benign. So I would say fine, give it a try. The only thing as a scientist that kind of worries me is your body makes melatonin. But if you take it by mouth, you're going to digest it. So I don't know if the melatonin actually enters your bloodstream as melatonin, because your GI tract sort of protects you from things getting into your body, and so it generally digests them. But, you know, unless it costs a lot of money, because that's a bad side effect, I think it's worth trying, sure.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I've even noticed, like, one thing, I mean, they've tried me on Ambien before, and my body gets used to it after being on it a few days. So it seems like I would have to take more. So that makes sense what you were saying, to only take it, you know, for a few days. And obviously the other thing is treat the symptoms, the actual symptoms of what is going on, not sleep. Sleep is just a side effect of not being treated correctly.
Right.
Yeah. So I wanted to get back into, you were talking about diabetes earlier, about all the research that you've done. How do I want to ask this? What have you found that does work if it isn't insulin? Like, what do you think would be the way to treat it correctly?
Well, the actual disease was officially discovered in 1901 by a pathologist at Johns Hopkins University. They had only been in business for about 3 years. And he was 18 or 19 at the time as a medical student. 1901. Remember, there were no cars in 1901. Just a few rich people had cars. So this guy had to, you know, go to medical school either walking or on a horse, right? So he looks at the pancreas, the part of the pancreas in charge of the diabetes, is called the islets of Langerhans. And Langerhans was a German pathologist who discovered these funny little things in your pancreas. Your pancreas is a digestive organ, and what are these little things in there, these little nests? The pancreas has two jobs. It digests food, and it produces insulin. So he looked under the microscope at these little, they're like little round areas, like if you took a melon baller and scooped out a chunk of watermelon, it would be the hole that's left. So you stuff capillaries, little tiny blood vessels, into that hole, and some special cells that make insulin. So the insulin-producing cells excrete it, goes into the little capillary. The capillary goes into big and circulates through your body. So he was looking at these, and he thought, wow, some of these look like they're damaged, these islets, and there's about 1 million of them in your pancreas. They look funny. They look like they're damaged. He did some special stains, and lo and behold, they showed some evidence of damage. And he made this little observation, having actually read his paper. Nobody else seems to have read it. And he said, it appears that there is leakage from the capillary, and what we're staining is that leakage. Kind of like when you were a kid and you just barely cut your skin and you got a little lymph draining out.
Right.
That's what drains. That's what drains out of the capillaries.
Okay.
So he didn't make any conclusions, because guess what? In 1901, diabetes wasn't discovered yet. They didn't know the relationship between blood sugar and these little islet cells. So he just made an observation. All science starts with a simple observation, and then you figure it out later. But if you don't bother to observe it in the first place, you're never going to discover it. So that made sense to me, because all the damage from diabetes has to do with capillaries leaking. So they leak in the pancreas, and they cause destruction of the little islets, the little scooped out areas, making insulin. Now you're not making as much insulin. So if you're not making as much insulin, your blood sugar starts to rise. Okay. So then the pathologist discovered later, egad, you know, now we know what the disease is, and lo and behold, there are these problems with eyes and kidneys. But if you review the pathology of those organs, lo and behold, it's always capillaries leaking. So capillary leaking in the pancreas causes decreased insulin. In your eye, causes eye problems. In your kidney, causes kidney problems. In the little blood vessels in your heart, it causes blood vessel problems.
It just keeps going.
So you see, the blood sugar is just a symptom.
Okay.
And really, the complications of diabetes are not complications at all. They're part of the disease. We like to put the word pathy on the end of things, to connote that it's a disease. So this is officially a capillopathy, a capillary disease. This is not recognized. Go ahead.
Oh, we have another caller. Did you want to take one more call, or
Sure.
did you want?
Sure.
Okay. Oh,
yeah. I'd rather do that than rattling on.
No. I mean, all this is important. Hang on one second here. I'll listen now.
Hello.
Hello. A caller from area code 262. What's your name and where are you from? And we have about 4 minutes, so we're going to have to make it quick.
My name is Spike, and I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Hi, Spike.
Beer capital of the world.
I have... Yes. I'll be quick here because I realize we're running out of time.
Okay.
I do have a problem cognitively speaking, but I'll focus to see if I can speak. I noticed today that there's a bipartisan bill that's gaining momentum concerning this opioid crisis. Could you, Dr. Kline, speak about that a little bit? And I think we're being threatened in the chronic pain community by our own government, and this really concerns me. Thank you.
No, you are correct. There's been a wildfire lit by the CDC, and they say, "Oh no, we didn't do it." Well, when you toss a cigarette out the window and cause a forest fire, you are responsible, and they're responsible. They have set the fire that dope fiends are just going to be running loose, terrorizing the neighborhoods because doctors write too many prescriptions and cause all this addiction. So let's make laws about the practice of medicine, which I don't care for. Let's do something. This is the same conversation that went on in 1950 in the New York Times. No different. Let's increase law enforcement. Let's spend more money. Let's do more treatment. Stop these dope fiends. The sad thing is that prescriptions do not cause addiction. Addiction usually starts in the teenage years. 90% of people who are going to become addicted because kids go to parties and they accidentally addict themselves at a very low rate, 4 per 1,000. And there's basically only 1 per 1,000 people running around right now getting ready to be addicted. So the whole problem, the whole solution to the problem, and the problem is really not there. They're making it up because of moralistic views about the practice of medicine concerning just this one thing, pain medicines. And they're wrong, and they are harming, just like you and 6.5 million other people. Go ahead.
I'm in a position where if I don't have opioids, my condition is so severe that I get no relief at all. None.
Well, you can try to use the palliative care, be certified as palliative care, which basically means you have a disease you can't treat, and treating the symptoms will improve your functioning. And go to a doctor. There's going to be something hopefully published soon explaining about palliative care, because palliative care is exempted by the CDC and by most states for any kind of restriction on opiates. So look into the palliative care thing, and I would definitely file a complaint with your Board of Registration in Medicine that your doctor has forced you off these medicines, and give examples of what your life was like before. Just talk about what's happened to you and what's happening now. Don't use the word pain. Try to avoid that. Say, here's what I could do before when I was on this medicine. Here's what I can do now, which is less. I feel I've been harmed, and for no reason. There was no medical reason to stop my medicines.
Well, I don't mean to cut you off.
It's a terrible thing.
Yeah, Spike, thank you for your questions. We have to get going here, but thank you so much, Dr. Kline, for taking the time to answer everyone's questions this evening. Did you want to say anything else before we get going, or?
No, I would just like to say thank you for inviting me on the show, and for all of the folks out there suffering from chronic pain, let me tell you, it's a mistake, and you need to scream and yell about it. Don't let this happen. Complain to legislators, complain to the Board of Registration in Medicine. It's not fair.
No.
And with that, I will depart.
All right. We'll see you next Tuesday. Thank you so much.
All right. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And right now we are going to have Dr. Terry Lewis speaking about UDAs on Call Nation. We'll see you then in about a minute. Have a good night.
You've been listening to The Doctor's Corner with Dr. Kline and Janelle Elgoway. Copyright 2018 by EXG LLC. All rights reserved.